Well, with that, we are going to start off. Good day to everyone where you're located. We are going to start today's workshop, which is focused on local futures, local development and society considered in the context of the new normal post-pandemic. I'm sure it's a topic that we're all very eager to learn more about and to prepare for as we start this journey together. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today, Rhonda Phillips, Uchendu Chigbu, Patsy Craiger. Rhonda, I think I'm going to hand it off to you and we can go from there.
Okay, great. Well, welcome. We're so glad you joined us for this panel. The idea here is that we're going to bring together scholars from around the globe, which all of us are, from all corners of the earth, it seems like today. And we want to look at particularly locally focused development, newer innovative applications, approaches, practices, research, and how we translate that into both publications and sharing with others. And more than that, looking at sort of what's changed, what are things that we need to be more aware about now that we are in this pandemic, and hopefully we'll be moving into a post-pandemic time at some point in the near future. And let me go ahead and take the opportunity to let my panelists introduce themselves, because we've got at least one panelist who has to hop up for a class, a virtual class, and then he'll be back later. So why don't we go ahead and introduce ourselves. First, I'm Rhonda Phillips with Purdue University in the US, and my work has been predominantly focused on community development, community well-being, and quality of life studies. And just look forward to being here with you today. So please take it away. Panelists, you want to just jump in as you can. Okay.
Sure, I'll go next. My name is Craig Talmadge. Good to be with you all. I love going to these World Community Development Conferences, even virtually. I'm the editor-in-chief for Community Development, the Journal of the Community Development Society here in the States. And I teach entrepreneurial studies at a small liberal arts between Rochester and Syracuse, New York, called Hobart and William Smith Colleges. And I'm most fascinated by, in my own work, of how do we talk about entrepreneurship on the local level and sort of socially entrepreneurial ecosystems like that. But I'm the one that's got to hop off to teach a quick class on Microsoft Excel for budding entrepreneurs, but I will be back. So wonderful to be with you all, and I'll see you again soon.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me? So I'm Uchendu Chibu, and a professor in land administration at the Namibia University of Science and Technology. Before now, I was a senior lecturer at the Technical University of Munich in Germany. So this is about my, I would say, 7th month, actually being resident in Africa after quite a long time. So it's a good homecoming for me. So most of my work, because I'm in land administration, most of my work are very much related on how to apply issues with regards to land. So basically I call them land methods or approaches towards community development. And my most impactful work is the tenure responsive land use planning, which is being implemented in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Philippines, the Laos, Uganda, and Kenya, and is endorsed by the UN Habitat. And my upcoming work, which actually would be launched at the International Federation of Surveyors, which is going on now, will be launched in 2 days' time, is the urban-rural land linkages. And that's actually, the document will be free online, also from the International Federation of Surveyors and the UN Habitat. And it's focused on not just urban-rural linkages, but the land and natural resource connections, between rural and urban areas. And that's where my position is coming at the moment, because in the post-pandemic, or even at this point, there's need, to link the urban and rural areas, because there's a dynamic in the community change because of reverse migration. And of course, we don't know what it's going to be afterwards, what the rural community is going to look like, especially in places like million people have come back to rural areas because of the pandemic. So I'll be looking at the interface of development from the context of natural resources. So that's what I do. Thank you.
Great, and I'm Bjorn Peterson, and I'm a lecturer in community development at the University of Glasgow here in the western part of Scotland. And my interests kind of stem from values-based community development processes and really looking at grassroots processes for expressing community felt needs and desires. And I'm especially interested in the I guess kind of the connections between personal and social transformation, and how our multiple ways of knowing, life ways and being can be more deeply integrated into our processes of community development at the local level and beyond. So.
Great, thank you so much. And there's one other member who couldn't make it today. That's Patsy Craiger. She's an associate professor at Georgia Southern University in the US. Her work really focuses on deliberative practice, public policy, public administration around community development, community well-being. She unfortunately had to take a drive across the country where she's moving out to a different region. And so she had to start that move today because of storm delays and various things. So she is driving, so she can't join us, but hold on one second. And what I'd like to do now is try to share my screen, give this a try and see if it actually works from this end. If not, I'll just come back to you here in just a moment. Let's see if this is it. Yeah, let me start the slideshow. Okay, let's see. Oops. There we go. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great, great. Okay, well, this session, again, this is a little bit of a different session. It's not just us delivering papers or presentations, but rather what we want to do is talk about some of the ideas with you and have hopefully lots of time to exchange those ideas and really look carefully and deeply at some of those opportunities that we can push forward, both on research and practice, as well as potential publishing outlets, which we'll talk quite a bit about a little bit later. But right now, I basically just want to point out that this is an interdisciplinary foray. And community development by its very nature is interdisciplinary because we come together from all manners of perspectives and disciplines and approaches and cultures and everything else. And so what we wanted to really try to get a more of a handle on today is how can we better understand some of the issues and challenges that are facing us now, having been in this pandemic for over a year now, and what is that new normal going to look like as we enter into post-pandemic times, again, hopefully soon. And so a couple of things. One is that we wanted to consider more about the process of adaptation or adopting change in our processes and what we're trying to do within community development. How have things changed now that we've had this time to respond to more urgent issues in the pandemic? And of special note is really about the ideas around innovation. Are there new ways to do things? We all have invoked much more virtual tools like we're doing right now, but there's other things too that have been emerging. So we'll talk about this in several different contexts. So a couple things. One, we have several themes, or I guess we could bundle together as issue areas that we want to parse through today. And let me give you and share that list and share with you. So a couple of themes. One is the deliberative participation, making that very specific about what we need to do, what we need to get accomplished in our development. We'll talk again about social environmental justice, about some of those land use issues. Uchendu talked already about, I just mentioned briefly about reverse migration. We want to hear more about that because that's something that definitely is coming as a result of the pandemic. I mean, we've even seen some shifts here in the US where people are dispersing from some of the urban centers into less populated areas just because they can now, because of the way things have changed. The future of work, we'll talk about that a little bit later as well, and how it is impacting community development. It's been a bit of a boost for some of the mid-size and smaller communities, given that they now can recruit virtual workers, because some employers are going to stay. Quite a few workers will be in that virtual environment versus going back into the physical space. And then, of course, there's community well-being, which is emerging fairly rapidly in the context of the collective or the community aspects of it. The individual aspects have been around for a while, but we're getting more and more interest now about that community or collective parts of well-being. And so we'll circle back to that too. And then there's some emerging issues, and just wanted to go through these for a moment to sort of help us set the context. As we know, there's a lot more social awareness and action now, as it should be, things around anti-racism, equity, and trying to look at the past also, reckon with and reconcile and move forward with colonization and other aspects of that. As I mentioned, the future of work is changing rapidly. This was spurred by the pandemic. I was laughing with a colleague the other day, virtually, that it wasn't that long ago that we could hardly get a faculty member to teach online. We'd have to give them all sorts of incentives. And now everyone is doing this, and how rapidly things can change, even knowing that we needed to do more of that before the pandemic, but my goodness, how things have changed so rapidly. And so we know that some of the removal of locational restraints have happened here too, with the future of work. There's also a compelling need for community. This has been bolstered or propelled by the isolation that many of us have experienced worldwide with the pandemic, the feeling of disconnection, and that people are very hungry for that reconnection and how to build that sense of community, and how to do that in ways that we think will benefit community development widely throughout the globe. And then there's also, along with all of these other issues, more attention is being paid to imminent climate change. And I think part of it is that we've had a chance to do more reflection since we've had a little more time away from our usual routines, and being aware that it influences us directly with our well-being and our health. Particularly, we've seen this more and more related to climate issues. And so that sort of sets a bit of the themes and the emerging issues there. I'll save that next slide for later, but what we'd like to do is Bjorn, if you want to start us off and tell us a little bit more about, you mentioned something earlier about the internal community aspects. We're eager to hear what you're thinking about that and how that can connect to any of these sort of themes and issues. So I'll stop the share, give the screen back to Bjorn, and let's take it away.
Thanks, Rhonda. Yeah, one of the things that occurs to me about the hopefully coming post-pandemic world is just, so much of what our communities have gone through in the last 18 months has been particular to the places and people that have been affected. And of course, there's been a lot of shared experiences as well. But I think one of the things that the pandemic has brought into focus again is just the diversity of experiences that people have and ways of encountering the world, all that have always been there. But these types of moments have an ability to kind of focus our attention in a way. And so I've long been interested in some of these questions about what I sometimes think about as the thresholds between the inner world and the outer world. And community development in particular has been, for very good reasons, I think, especially focused on the outer world, the material realities of our everyday life, the material realities of the communities that we build. And so that's always been important. And the inner life of communities has been something that we've sort of left to other other folk, local people who understand the kind of local cultural and cultural dynamics, life ways that are local to where people are. So my hope is that at this moment there's a renewed focus on how much of our worlds together are not material, are the things that we hold in our mental spaces, the things that we hold in spaces that maybe are animated by mystery and by the ineffable, the things that are hard to describe. And of course, it's challenging because so often within, especially the sciences and the social sciences, we have shied away at times from values conversations, especially as we think about the legacy of sort of hegemonic values sets that have kind of overrun and often violently erased the ways of knowing and being of communities that didn't match those dominant ways. And so, there's been a tendency, in my view, to kind of stick to the technical, and when shying away from the technical, kind of making space for storytelling, making space for personal expression. But I think there's also room, or I would argue that there is a need to tend to the ways in which our inner worlds are entangled with the day-to-day material realities of our lives. And the word innovation is interesting because on the one hand, it feels new to this moment, but a lot of this stuff is not new, and it's not new to plenty of communities and never stopped doing it and have been trying to tell us to pay more attention to it for a long time. So I want to be careful to suggest that this is particularly innovative, but I do believe that in the pandemic, we've seen through things like mental illness and experiences of isolation and fear and rising anxiety that really do connect into people's experience of climate change, for instance, or of migration, where identities and cultures are challenged and changed. And it's an incredible time where we are adapting at an amazing rate, and yet that adaptation is in fits and starts. As we know, it's not uniform, and certain pieces of it get more attention and resources than others. And so my hope, with this conversation about inner worlds, what are the inner worlds of our communities, is meant to sort of, invite more discussion of sort of a pluralist understanding of how we create values and how we create meaning in our worlds together, and how those meanings take on both personal and collective and corporate meaning, and how that meaning interacts with our practices. And so that's kind of just a taste of it, and I can say more later or respond to any questions, but I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much. That's, there's so many questions embedded in all of that we could, I was just sitting here thinking, like, any one of those or a couple of those could be a whole special issue, just to focus on, like, how did we adapt? How are we changing, like in community development practice and application? So that's a very rich field to go back and really mine. If you don't mind, let's go ahead and give our panelists a chance to sort of make their opening statements, and then we'll circle back to Q&A, because I think we'll get our better, we'll have more Q&A time, I believe, that way. Uchendu, can you take it away and share with us some of the ideas you're thinking about around whatever, research interests you might have, or things that you're observing in community development? Anything you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, thank you, Rhonda. Actually, I was in Nigeria 3 months ago, and I was in the village. And that's the very first time I started getting the feeling that the pandemic it would have quite a lot of impact on community. It's already having that. As to what it would be in the post era, we don't know. And we can't actually tell when the post era is going to be. However, I noticed that there's more of disconnectedness than connectedness, because of the pandemic. In fact, if you allow me, I could call that sort of a growing anti-community, but I'm speaking from a rural perspective, because in Nigeria, the rural areas, like most places, are well knit together as a community. And so most of the privileges you get and the things you enjoy within the rural areas are due to communal life. But I saw this level of anti-community where, because of the coronavirus, the need for social distancing and imposition of curfew, more connecting rituals, such as burial ceremonies, child naming ceremonies, festivals, and now not really taking place in the way they usually are. So I think that's a challenge from a rural perspective, because the rurality itself is known for its connectedness, and the pandemic is changing all of that in terms of the values and the practices. And in the much more traditional rural areas, as you would have in most developing countries, for instance, in most African and Asian countries, you find out that when this thread of connection is lost, then there is need to start researching more on how to, make up for it, because then the core character of a rural community, gets lost. I'm not really saying that communities are different elsewhere, but from a rural perspective, there is much more traditionality and connectivity, to it. And the pandemic is causing a whole lot of problems, and which actually leads to what will then become of these rural communities afterwards. Some factors that I've had to think about are issues concerning maybe the new geography of working spaces, and this, when I was in Nigeria, I could work from the rural areas, but that's rural areas where you have internet, where you have the virtual infrastructure. But unlike in other places, in most developing countries, actually, the pandemic and the dependence on virtual and online connections and community itself becomes, it becomes exclusive. So it excludes the rural, the rural areas where these infrastructure, are not well embedded and do not really, exist. So I noticed that there is this issue of inclusivity and, isolation side by side. In the manner we are dealing with, as we are here today, it's much more inclusive at at a broader level, at a global level. But when you go down to the community, the local communities, you find out that it becomes more of an isolation, because there is already the physical isolation which people deal with, but then there's also the disconnection, the rest of the world, because of a lack of virtual infrastructure that do not exist there. So I would say that in terms of research, I think it's high time, especially when it comes to local development and society. It's time. I mean, we were doing this before, but maybe we could move deeper, into more in-depth studies and publications on issues or studies that relate to community from the virtual context. Because I've also realized that the online community or the virtual community is not very much different from the brick and mortar community we live in, because I just left 2 conferences to be here, and under a normal situation, we talk about, I'll probably be in this conference and I will be there face to face with all of you, and we can chat, have coffee, and all that. But now it's possible for me to be in 5 different conferences in one day. And then you realize at the end of the day, you don't really get other jobs done other than sitting and having a chat and deliberating, and on and on and on. And I think it also puts, like the previous speaker said, a sort of mental burden, on us. I never knew someone could be on the net and really feel tired, except now that we have these talks. But that then brings up the issue of digital literacy in itself, which we didn't need in the usual, in the so-called normal community life, but also the digital well-being as a community member. I think for me, it's in terms of research, I've been more, I'm more from the surveying, engineering background, but I was born in a village in Nigeria, so I realized early enough that most of our work in those areas tend to focus more on citation index, speaking as an academic, and getting more citation index and all that. But when it comes to community development, there's more of the aspiration and the opportunities to actually create social impact rather than citation impact. And that's what keeps me in this area of community. And then this pandemic has created also opportunities, research opportunities to delve deeper into, digital or virtual well-being, within communities, and as well as what does development actually mean? Because when we talk about community development, we've most times have had to define it purely from the perspective of, the physical life we live rather than from the online. So the digital livability itself is things that I think we should look more into, and also to grasp development not beyond the improvement of physical life, but towards visual infrastructure, visual well-being, and online living conditions, which some countries have more than others. Within countries, some regions have more than others, and within regions, urban, rural areas have it more than others. And then within rural areas, some people have better appliances, have access to appliances and all that. And so it comes with opportunities and burden. And I think that's what we need to begin to look at from a research perspective, but also not to take it for granted, but treat it the same way we treat our usual, understanding of community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uchendu. That's, again, there's so many different inspiring things that you said there. I think we could take any of them and run with it to do any sort of publications or special issue or whatever else we wanted to do with it. But you said something that I'd love to come back to, which is community development's about aspirations and opportunities to make positive social impact. I heard Anna say that earlier this morning, probably at the opening session, and it's something to that effect. So I'm probably paraphrasing at this point, but you're right. I mean, this is something different. This is more than studying just one thing in context. I mean, we're studying the whole of a collective of people living together in their places and seeking to make those places better and having better opportunities for the people who live there. And so I think you're really onto something there, this idea around the positive social impact. And from your perspective of bringing in the physical land dimensions, I know land use and environmental issues are really near and dear to your research. And, that's probably something that might be missing, and in ways that we need to make it even stronger out there so that people can see those kind of connections in very specific ways. I had a group reach out to me, which I thought was really fascinating. They're a group of scientists who do coastal zone planning, coastal management of the interface of people and the oceans and waterways. And they want to do work and a workshop on community well-being. And so a couple of things, whenever we have an issue or a trend that's emerging, in a discipline or in an interdisciplinary foray like community development is, that you begin to see these little indicators pop up about it. And one of them is when other groups who are not in any way sort of directly related to what you study or your disciplines start to have interest in it. And so, we're beginning to see more and more of that pop up. I'll give you another sort of a funny example, or at least not really funny, but sort of another indicator. When you start seeing businesses and the corporate side of things start taking those verbiage and those words and in using it, then you know that you're in an emerging trend or something that's going to become pretty big. And we see that happening around well-being. If you've noticed, quite a few corporate messaging and marketing is now including well-being. And that's something that, it really indicates that's becoming something that's beyond just a group of people studying it or using it in their practice. It's becoming bigger than that. I also noticed with a lot of interest that I was recently reading something in a business publication, and they were talking about storytelling, which I think, Bjorn, you mentioned that earlier. And I was fascinated to see it in that context because it was going beyond what they normally describe or use as case studies, but this was really talking about storytelling in the sense that we as community developers talk about storytelling and the benefits of that and how it's reflective of not only history, but can be of values of culture, intercultural aspects, on and on. And we've long known the benefits of using storytelling as a powerful way to connect people both to the past and to current generations, across generations, and on and on. And I was fascinated to see this in the context of sort of business and the corporate world, as if this were something really sort of new and novel to them. And so I think it bespeaks volumes when you start seeing other groups talking about these things. And to my mind, I think that things like community well-being or well-being are going to be sort of the next thing around, as like sustainability came on the front pretty rapidly, and then everybody was talking about it. I think well-being is going to be that next thing in many ways, and community development is part and parcel of that. So we need to make sure that we're in those conversations and in that awareness, so that we're not, so that more people can know about us and have those positive benefits that we can bring to the table. I mentioned storytelling because we're going to get ready to pull together a special volume. It'll either be a book or an issue of one of the journals around storytelling. It's time to sort of revisit this in some of the newer contexts. So if you're interested in that, watch our websites. I'll give you those towards the end of the session about storytelling. And also, if I may just take a moment and tell you just a quick little story about two communities. And Uchinja, this goes back to quite a few of the things you were saying about rural versus urban, and that interface of how rural communities in particular have to overcome quite a few things that maybe that urban places have a little bit more resources to pull from. So here are two communities. Now I'm from, originally, I don't live there now, but I didn't, I was raised there. That's where I was born. In the poorest state in the United States, which is Mississippi. Some of you may have heard of Mississippi. It tends to make the list and indicators, but not in a good way. It tends to be mostly towards the bottom of things like health indicators and income, wealth, any kind of job, wealth indicators, on and on. And so we've struggled for a really long time in our state to overcome and to get to the point where we can begin to move forward. So I recently visited two different rural communities. Now, rural in the US is anything up to 50,000 in population. And these two communities are about 25,000 and about 35,000. So they're considered rural. And it was dramatically different in the way that they're both approaching community development and what kind of outcomes they're getting. And it was just absolutely stark in the differences. And they're located not that far from each other. It's about 50 to 75 miles away. And one community was absolutely thriving. They used the pandemic as a way to connect more deeply with each other, using a lot of the social media platform and tools. But more than that, they made sure that people weren't being left behind in ways that they couldn't recover from once the pandemic finishes. And I asked them why they were doing things this way, why they were able to get some really positive outcomes when many other places are not and are suffering mightily. And here's what they said to me, which struck a note sort of deep in my community development soul that I want to build something from that, just from them saying. And here's what they said. So when I asked, how did you approach this? Or why did you approach it in this way? Because you're getting all these good positive outcomes. And they said, because we care about each other. Because we care about each other. And this is a very diverse community with a wide variety of incomes and educational levels, and it's racially diverse as well. And that struck something deep inside me, because what they're saying is that they care enough to do something, to make a difference, to make a positive difference. And the other community that I went to and visited with recently about community development is just in a very dire position. In fact, you can see it. You know how it is when you go visit somewhere, the visual clues give you a lot of indicators of what's happening in a place. And from the moment I went into their town, there was a lot of uncollected trash, a lot of litter, a lot of graffiti, not the nice kind that could be made into murals, but the derogatory kind that's intent on sort of more tearing down a place. And there were dilapidated buildings that were falling in. So there were no policies that were being enforced about taking care of those kind of properties. The landscaping that was in common areas, like in the public spaces, was not taken care of. So everything was overgrown. It was a lot of litter. It was, falling in buildings, literally. And there was just a sense of hopelessness in that community. And when I talked with a group of people that were involved in development there, I asked them why was this happening, what's happening? And they said that essentially that people don't care enough to do anything. So here's two ends of the spectrum. Here's one small community in a rural area that cares about each other, and you can see it, you can experience it when you're there, they're getting positive outcomes. Here's the other that was a little bigger in population and logically would have had a little more resources, saying that no one cares. And you can see it visually, you can also feel it in the tone of people's voices and what are the plans for the future? And there wasn't much there. And so this all circled back and drove home to me this idea of how we need to have caring more and more and empathy more and more embedded in what we do in community development. And in fact, we're working with colleagues now to look at caring communities and what those responses have been during the pandemic, and how that differs from maybe when you don't have that, when you have apathy or hopelessness or a lack of caring, the kinds of outcomes that you can sort of predict based on that. And I know this sounds probably, it's not so concrete that we can measure it as easily as we can other indicators in our development practices, but it's still there and nonetheless has a dramatic influence on places. So that's something to look for too, is this idea of caring communities. We've seen some of it emerge with our economics colleagues, with caring economics. That's becoming more and more popular now. And you'll probably see more of that as we go forward. But I just wanted to sort of illustrate a couple of those things. Let me take a break right here and ask if there's any questions of our panelists that you've just heard from, Chindu and Bjorn. Anything that you want to ask right now before we move on into some other things about our research and publishing opportunities. Let's see.
Rhonda,
Yeah.
do you mind if I add a little something to what you were just saying?
Please do. Please do. And
Yeah,
I'll read
great.
that.
Yeah, you were talking about caring and one of the things that's still difficult for the conversation within community development, I feel at least in times, is the language we have around some of these things that are sort of difficult to put our finger on or sort of hard to describe. And so caring was a good example. But another one that I've been thinking about a lot is our communities over the past year and a half have in different ways had to deal a lot with fear, and the capacity to encounter and navigate fear as a community is something that I feel we don't have a lot of great literature on. And it's not to say there's none there, but I feel like we could use a lot more robust conversation when it comes to helping communities. When you think about this idea of capacity building, or the idea of sort of developing new tools with which a community can exercise its sense of agency, or move toward its aspirations, whatever those are. The ability to move through things like fear and anxiety that are hanging heavy in a community, that's one of the areas that I would like to see more research on, both at the local level, to look at what are some of the examples of how communities are actually working through some of those things, in their context in real time. There's been some really interesting stuff, that's gone on here in our context in Scotland, as well as in Northern Ireland, around sectarianism and some of the work that's been done over the years to try to work with communities that have had a lot of fear, and good reason to fear at times, but also sometimes can become almost have a sense of being trapped in a cycle of fear. And so when fear has such a huge role in our communities, I think we could use some more tools that are community-based, that are reflective of the practice at the local level, because we do have practitioners of various kinds working on these issues in our communities. But I feel like there's room for us to grow our literature within the community development world on dealing with some of those dynamics. So.
Yeah, I would so agree with that, Warren. Absolutely. I think we need a much deeper dive in how to deal with sort of this, I guess it's sort of the negative aspects of community development. And if Craig were here right now, he would start talking about the dark side of community development and social entrepreneurship. But, how do we parse through things like hopelessness and fear and make it be viewed in a context so we can actually move forward and get things done? Because you can see that can happen. We all know examples of success where community development processes and applications and approaches have worked well. We all know these. What I think I hear you saying is that we need more deep dive and the research to support, well, okay, what do we do when it's not working, or when there isn't certain factors like the ability to build social capital because there's perhaps too much hopelessness there? How do we move past that? And so I think that's probably something we need to do a much deeper dive in community development in our research. Absolutely. Any more comments or suggestions on the things we've talked about to this point? We've got some great things in the chat too. I'm trying to multitask and look at those too. Okay, Martin, did you have a question? Yes, I see a hand. Okay, go for it.
Yeah, there's been so much just in what you've said already between you. And I just typed up some, as I was listening, I was typing some notes, and it occurs to me that you've identified a range of different spectrums on which shape and inform the approach a community development a community development practitioner would take in thinking about how they would work in a given community. So there's, are we focusing on the inner or the outer dialogue, urban, rural spectrum, developed or developing, economies, the virtual and the real world, the stuff around hopelessness, apathy and fear, as opposed to hope, love and action. Are we looking at well-being, or are we looking at economic? And when I was thinking about that, in my experience, what we've tended to do is make connections between communities to get mutual support, experiences, ideas about how to address things. We connect communities in a similar point on the spectrum. So the economically disadvantaged communities, we'd create spaces for them to come together. We might create spaces for different ethnic groups to come together and explore their spaces. And I think we miss a trick there, because we should be mixing this up, building people's connectivity right across those different spectrums. So that enhances understanding, it identifies opportunities, and that kind of connectedness might generate the kind of hope that is missing in many communities. You know, they were just the thoughts that you triggered. I mean, there's loads, isn't there? There's so much in what you've all said to explore.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martin. What you're saying really resonates deeply, I suspect, with us. It certainly does with me. And it reminds me of something that someone said in the opening session this morning. And I wrote it down because it's something I want to always remember this. And it said, you know, embracing the dignity of difference. In other words, we can't think that one approach is going to be good for everyone in that community because of differences, but because of, you know, it may be cultural differences or whatever, but we've got to be aware that there will be different things needed by different groups in our communities. And so I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's a good reminder that we have to think carefully about intercultural applications, but also those differences that we are needed in our communities to approach what we need to do. So thank you so much for sharing with that. And what I'd like to do now, if we have a few more minutes to go into a couple more things, the themes that we talked about earlier, the issues and challenges, I just wanted to circle back to the future of work. And I've had this bee in my bonnet now for a while, because what we're seeing is that we're just going to, a lot of what we know is changing, already has with the pandemic, but it's going to remain changed into the future. There will obviously be those types of employers that will, you know, require that people have to be back on site and in place, but there are many that will not. And I've already declared that they're not going to be bringing in everyone back to, you know, headquarters or facilities. In fact, they're going to be moving more towards virtual. Universities and colleges are probably some of the holdouts, but even in that sector, we are beginning to move towards some that will be, you know, I even saw something recently where some people will remain in remote working. Some will be hybrid, meaning they'll be sometimes on campus, sometimes not. But and we're pretty inflexible as an industry goes, you know, in the academy, but many employers are becoming more flexible. So I've been puzzling over this for a while, looking at overlaps with what does this mean for community development and community well-being with what we know about the future of work. A couple of things. There's the World Economic Forum puts out this list that I love looking at every few years when they come out, about the top job skills needed for the future. The current one is the top skills for 2025. And here's what's so striking about this list, and has been for a while, but particularly this new list, because this is sort of a pandemic era list. And these overlap with community development. And this is why I think we're more relevant than we've ever been in our profession and in our application and research in community development. A couple of things. One is leadership and social influence. My goodness, I mean, how many leadership development programs do we have in community development? And isn't that what we're doing, is social influence? Another top skill was resilience. Well, we know about this. This is what we do in community development. By building social capacity, we're building resilience. By building those networks, we're building resilience. There's also things in their skill list about ability to deal with stress or stress tolerance and flexibility. And again, I say to you, community development is all about this. If we're not able to respond to the pressing, sometimes dire needs in our communities, and also help people recover from whatever it may be, economic shocks, natural disasters, whatever happens, and build in that stress tolerance and flexibility, then I don't know what community development is, apparently, because I think this is exactly what we do. There's also another top skill around creativity. I can tell you that as community developers, you probably have to be more creative than most people in some of the other disciplines that our colleagues might work in, because we're constantly presented with changes and new challenges. And once you've got something going really well, then something will change about it. And so we have to be constantly creative. And then finally, one of the top skills was active learning. And that's, again, what community development does. That's how we do our programs. That's how we do our approaches. That's how we work with other members in our communities, is active learning. So we sweep people in, get them involved, help them see themselves in what needs to be done or can be done, and they do it. And we rely heavily on volunteerism. That's active learning. And so when I look at a list like that, that's coming from a very much a sort of employer-driven, economics-driven perspective, I see community development all over it. And one of our challenges will be to help others see that too, so that they can bring in some of the things that we do, some of the strategies, some of the approaches, some of those good, positive social impacts and outcomes, and have that be part of that. But I do believe that the future of work is going to open up so many opportunities for communities that perhaps in the past may have been suffering because of lack of, say, population moving out. Well, now, because of affordability issues, we're seeing more people come back into some of these places that can offer that landscape of affordability and housing. Perhaps they have it's just easier to live there and cheaper than some of our cities. And so we're beginning to have a little bit of this reversal. Now, it will never stem the tide at all, but there will be some reversal of people going back into smaller communities because of what the pandemic has opened up for the future work. So I just wanted to mention that, because there will be some calls for papers and special issues and various things coming over the next year or two around this future of work. And what I'd like to see is, let's think about how we can connect future of work to community development, and not sort of be left out of that conversation, because again, a lot of what we do is all over what they're thinking about as employers. And again, that was the World Economic Forum, if you want to go look at it. It's really interesting. So any comments from Uchendu or Warren about anything else before we move into sort of the publication phase of things?
I would just like to add, after you gave us an example of the two communities, the two rural communities, where one is caring and the other is, I don't know how to describe that. I was left actually trying to look back in my community in Nigeria and trying to understand, is it really a radical change that a kind of somewhat very caring community suddenly becomes uncaring during a time of pandemic? And what I've come to think, what comes to my mind is that it might not be that the communities do not care, but it's more of a fearful, or if you allow me to rhyme, a fearing community, because no one has had this before. So, and that's where resilience comes in. When you're resilient and you have you have contingency plans, and then there's leadership, then it becomes possible to prepare a community to deal with this. But when there is no leadership, no policies at the local level to deal with this sort of thing, I go back again, particularly in the context of sub-Saharan Africa, where natural resource access is still a problem. And then this sort of thing happens. And there's also the conspiracy theory that in my village, they believe actually Bill Gates Bill Gates prepared the pandemic and put it on the world. So there's a lot of conspiracy theories. From some people look at it to mean is the white man, that put this. So many of these things. And when you look at this, there's a high level of I don't want to use just ignorance, and then illiteracy, and also the lack of information. And so there is, when it's like a disaster happens, an earthquake happens, but you don't see the direction it's coming from. It's just there in the air. You hear someone died, you hear someone is sick. And so it becomes pretty fearful for members of a community that they are so confused in a state of chaos that they don't know what to do. And I think, I don't want to give the pandemic so much credit, at least in the context of some communities that I know, that they suddenly became, became uncaring, from a very caring level. But another thing I would also like to say about the pandemic is, at the professional level, and I've done a paper on this, it actually now calls to question the job of the planner. Because planning should have been dealing with public health. I believe the origin of planning came from public health. And all through the centuries, planners have moved away from it. And then within the urban community, we have the informal settlements, which, is, you see the proliferation of informal settlements all over the developing world, the sub-Saharan Africa, in Asia, India, and all that. And what the pandemic has done is actually, is been able to highlight the division and, between, even within the urban circles, the core formal urban areas and the informal urban areas where it was impossible to do social distancing because there are not facilities for social distancing in the first place. And then at the professional level, it calls to question as to whose job was it in the first place to have, planned towards, a resilient urban environment, or rather regional environment. And so I think it calls for a recollection and, of course, a rethink of what the job of us all, the planners, the architects, the social anthropologists, and all the related professions, within the community. And so I think it's bad in the sense that it's led to a lot of casualties. It led to a lot of change of lifestyle, which we didn't foresee. But at the same time, I think what the pandemic has done, it's the transformation, whether it's positive or negative, is much more in the sense of we having to adapt or readapt things that were considered secondary previously to become primary. Because I was doing online learning 7 years ago, so it wasn't like it's new. I was in Germany doing online learning alongside with colleagues in the Netherlands in another university. We've been Skyping for a long time, doing conference Skyping, but it was more private, and it wasn't something that was considered as a primary way of living. And I think the change, the drastic change to suddenly adapt. So we didn't care about community at that point, even though some researchers tried to, look into that. But we didn't care so much about community because there wasn't no real feeling of community, on those platforms. But what it has done is that it's making us, come together online. And my concern is that while that works in a certain place and within certain regions and certain professions, we also need to remember that the only reason, actually, I think this is the only conference I've been so far without any technical hitches. So it's not like the online thing is so perfect, but it does provide easier interaction, but then it also has its aspects where it does isolate. And you begin to see those isolations when you look at infrastructural development, whether it's in terms of ICT or even related to issues of mental well-being. Thank you.
Bjorn, you want to jump in?
Yeah. There, I wanted to pick up on something that Chenda just said, but also going back to Martin and Anna a little bit, but they were talking a little about these kind of, maybe you want to call them folding points, where issues have they've folded around something like, so urban rural is a good example of how we fold the community in half. And there's other ways we fold communities, and some of them continue to be useful. And some of them, sometimes I wonder if the analysis around them has gotten a little bit tired and stale. And so we have, I think, an opportunity to reimagine some of our lines of solidarity and the way in which the community can be thought of in terms of who has what in common with who. I think there's some really important differences. So I want to be careful not to say, we should just move away from all of the ways in which we've understood our analysis. But I do think there's opportunities to look across lines that that are sort of put there unreflectively, right? So that we imagine a difference because it's usually there, it's still there, and therefore these two communities maybe have nothing in common, or no points of comparison or analysis, or have no ability for collaboration and creativity together. And so I sort of hope that one of the ways that we can look at the experience of the pandemic and how so many communities that on paper we might have thought would respond the same way absolutely did not. And in other cases, communities that we would have thought had not much in common on these issues actually found something in common. And so I think there's an interesting way in which we can continue to push our understanding of the solidarities and the commonalities of our communities, as well as the differences, and add hopefully another layer or three of analysis to the way we understand how communities do develop, and how and what they hold in common. So that was all I wanted to add to that part of the conversation.
Thank you so much. That's great. Yeah, these are so insightful, and we're getting some great comments in the chat too. I hope we can copy that chat somehow and get a copy of it so we can get it translated. Craig, I see you're back. Do you want me to start the slide on the publication opportunities so we can you can take some time for that, and then we're going to leave a good maybe 20 minutes at the end for Q&A, and we'll open that up. So would you like for me to share screen?
Sure, that would be great. And I apologize for being gone, and I love the conversation I popped back into. I will be the boring one, and only in the boring way of, yeah, I'll give the announcements, but I also want to give some advice and some sort of logistics and the things that we're looking for. I mean, I resonated so much, Bjorn, with what you said. Maybe we're using sort of tired approaches and things like that. I want to highlight some of those things. So Local Development Society is a great journal, brand new. It's the sister journal of Community Development, which is the larger community development journal hosted in the United States. There's other great journals on agriculture and food systems, rural and agricultural development. We have a number of community development journals in the United States. International Journal of Community Wellbeing is also a wonderful journal, specifically if you're looking at indicators of well-being, quality of life. They're affiliated with International Society of Quality of Life Studies. They're really great. What I like about International Journal of Community Wellbeing is it has a lot of flexibility, right? So if you want to write an article that's more of a case study approach, if you want to write an article that's more of an overview of research or provide perspectives, what we're really trying to move in Local Development Society, International Journal of Community Wellbeing, and Community Development, the one I'm editor-in-chief of, is really not like limiting research to hardcore statistical, quantitative, empirical things, because there's work in the world of community development all over, and there are wonderful people from thought pieces to on-the-ground work to articles that are really robust regarding methods that could be employed in different communities, and we really want to capture those. There are opportunities if you publish in these journals, Local Development, International Journal of Community Wellbeing, and Community Development, to actually turn some of your works into books. And that's one aspect. But if you'd like to propose your own book, whether it be an edited volume or an individual volume, please do reach out to Rhonda and I. We would be absolutely glad to be a guide for you in that aspect. So things that we're seeing, I would say that, you know, on the logistical end, as a person who edits the journal titled Community Development, I have a number of articles that come in that are wonderful, that talk about wonderful local development things, and they never use the word community development in the article. So really just missed, you know, and it's sort of it's really tricky right there, you know, not that publishing is a game, but that you really want to make sure that you're speaking to the audience of the place you're publishing. Now, community development is actually the journal we're in, you know, and local development as well. It has the opportunity, if you have more practice-based pieces or educational pedagogical works that have worksheets and tools and things like that, we have a lot of flexibility with the publisher, Taylor and Francis, to actually publish those things now. And so those things can even be reviewed editorially as opposed to going out for double-blind peer review. And that's an option we give authors. We can do that with particular things. So, so always just feel free to reach out. I would really say that some of the other struggles, community development and local development themselves are really in need of really good methodological articles. So if you have a methodology that's worked in multiple communities, that is from community organizing to assessment, to leadership, to mobilization, to marketing, to getting, you know, conflict resolution. Like, we do not have a lot on conflict resolution. We would really welcome that, whether it be, again, empirical, whether it be, and I'm empirical, I use in qualitative and quantitative sense, you know, whether it be the, you know, thought piece or reflections, commentaries, essays, we need it. We're like thirsty for it. And it's really problematic. We also need critiques. So I'm personally working on a critique now of ethnography and community development. I'm working with an anthropologist on it. There are some major issues with how we say we're doing ethnography when we just sat at a coffee shop for 3 days. That's not necessarily honoring ethnography as it's meant as a tool. And so sort of thinking about how do we ensure that there are, for lack of better terms, some standards. And I actually use a better word like guidelines, recommendations. How can we help improve? Because we are seeing a number of granting agencies across the United States really get excited, you know, about sort of quantitative data, but they also really want qualitative data, really strong testimonies and stories. But those require, and it's not my favorite word, but they require demonstrations of rigor. And the bar is a little higher sometimes when we're in the context of granted and contracted funded aspects. And so I will wrap up by saying there's a number of wonderful trustworthiness strategies and things that people just kind of forget to put in their paper that they probably did anyways. And so, you know, I'm always glad if you want to reach out just personally before you even submit a paper, just give it a look and see, you know, is it a good fit, but just give you some of this advice that, you know, and if you're a new scholar or a new person to publishing, you know, we love you. We want to publish you. We get the same people over and over again, right? What we want though is to help you succeed. And I say to new authors, I said, one of the hardest articles to publish is just the first one. The first one's always the hardest. And then you kind of learn, there's a routine. Publishing and writing is a muscle. And I am glad to help be your mentor if you need it.
Thank you so much, Craig. And I just realized with horror that I didn't put community development on the slide of publications. I didn't save that version. So everyone, you can find the journal. It's called Community Development. It's published by Taylor and Francis. It's also aligned with the Community Development Society. It's their journal. And that's where Craig is our interim editor-in-chief and has done an amazing job with this journal. And so do take him up on that offer if you have anything you'd like to send in to him. I also wanted to mention that all our panels today are somehow involved with the journals or book series, either on the editorial board, or they serving as editors, or you know, otherwise to help these journals and book series. And as Craig mentioned, there is a opportunity if you publish a special issue with community development or a special issue with local development society, you can also turn those into books, either in the series, or there's actually another series called Current Issues in Community Development. You can publish there, and then about a year after the special issue appears, it comes out as a book and can have additional materials. And so there's a lot of publishing opportunities. And I just want to say very quickly, Local Development Society is a new journal. We're publishing authors from all over the world, so it's become a very global in scope journal. And we also welcome, in addition to original research articles and manuscripts, we welcome case studies, reviews of either the commonly expected books or programs, organizations, or policies. And so we're trying very hard to have both practitioners and researchers be part of this journal. And so for that reason, we very much have quite a few things around cases, around perspectives. Sometimes we'll do a request for commentaries, which are short reflective pieces, and encourage you to find out more about any of these publishing opportunities. These are just a few. There's many more. There's that wonderful journal from Oxford, the Community Development Journal. There are many across the world and across the globe. These are just the ones that we're involved in and more focused on. So we can obviously help you if you want to ask questions or just submit something. We're always here to look for it. And I do have to say that all the things we've talked about and more that hopefully we'll discover in our Q&A session coming up is that we'd love to see these ideas translated into publications so that others can learn from it and push forward in their own practice and their own strategies and work in their communities. So let's push forward on any and all of these. Let's open it up to the audience. And when you introduce yourself, just say as a brief introduction of what kind of organization you're with. And if you could maybe just include sort of one thing that's top of mind for you as a community developer, and then please ask your question. So we've got, let's see, technically 18 minutes left for our Q&A. We'll open it up. We want to hear from all of you now. You've heard enough from us. We want you to talk now. So please jump in. And apologies if I don't see a hand up. So you might just want to jump in and start asking things instead of waiting for me to see that hand signal go up. So please do.
Rhonda?
Yes, please.
It's Lucius Botus here. I'm from South Africa, so it's so nice to see such a diverse audience. Maybe just 2 or 3 reflections, what has been said, particularly by Bjorn, and also by my another, I can almost call him a colleague, Uchendu, because I'm a trained development studies person, and I moved more into community development and being a sociologist myself. I think the one thing that I want to agree with you is this notion of fear and the uncertainty factor, which one cannot, I think, overemphasize. Coming from a country like South Africa, and I grew up in Namibia, I lived and worked there for 20 years as well. These are 2 of the most unequal societies in the world as well, between the top 10% and the bottom 10% in terms just of material wealth and how you measure it. And that adds another dimension, the fact that you have such vast inequalities in these, for instance, many of these Southern African countries, which put the whole issue of social justice and inequality right at the coalface, and which one cannot ignore when you actually talk about community development work, which I think is important. Secondly, Rhonda, in your earlier speech in the plenary, you also mentioned the notion of well-being. And I think that is so important. Some of the work that I've really enjoyed way back was work of a Chilean economist called Manfred Max Neef, when he came up with this idea of human scale development and his famous matrix. And he made a distinction between having, being, interacting, and doing. In other words, if you talk human development, it's definitely not only about well-having, it's all about well-being, it's about interacting and doing. And I think what some of the stuff that you said, I think that is what the pandemic has emphasized to me again, this notion that it is a bit more complex. One should be careful not to reduce to binaries, like what you said, urban, rural, or to those that have virtual access or not. So one needs to maybe reflect a bit deeper. And one can never, I also would say, underestimate the levels of woundedness of some of our communities, specifically the more or the less affluent, and those at the so-called bottom of the pyramid. Now, again, I'm talking from a South African, Namibian, Southern African perspective. So when you start off with thinking about any community development initiative, sometimes the levels of human dignity is so eroded in many ways that you almost need to start to work, accompany people at that level to deal with their woundedness in many, many ways. That is my experience in working in many of South Africa's and Namibia's so-called townships. And I want to conclude by just saying that, yeah, I've shared the phrase, Rhonda, about embracing the dignity of difference. And it wasn't my cleverness. It came from one of a rabbi called Jonathan Sachs that has written a lot about, his entire book on the dignity of difference. But I think the challenge is, how do we deal with all these things at once? In fact, in my own workspace, I'm based at the South African University as a professor in development studies now. And in my own workspace and my wife's workspace, we've lost 12 colleagues, including our Dean of Law and our Vice Rector. 12 colleagues to the pandemic. This is now in the context of learned people in a university space. And you can just imagine if you move out to other spaces, people sort of at this stage, their levels of uncertainties and fear. So I think the notion of anxiety, how do we restore hope? How do we give people a sense that, we move together? Those are vital things. And we've talked a lot about interdisciplinarity as well. And I think now is the time also for transdisciplinarity. And I don't want to play just with these words, but where we really also ask common people, work with them. How do we move forward? And how can we avail our skills and our tools to really build better? And this is what you talk about, the resilience. These are my few contributions for what it's worth. And by the way, to the editor, what is his name? Craig, yeah. My first publication that I sent away, the editor came back many years ago and said, you can't be serious. And I said, yes, no, I'm dead serious. I want to get this thing published. They said, well, then you need to listen to some advice. And he actually sat with me and he gave me some pointers. So that's how we all learn, yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. And so sorry for your loss. I mean, this has been, just unprecedented for our generations to go through this. And so really sorry for that. And you said something that I just want to pick up very quickly, which is interdisciplinary. And I've been using that sort of catch-all term. Transdisciplinarity is about creating new areas of study, either by combining others or something entirely different. And you're right. It's almost like it's time for things like community development, community well-being, perhaps other disciplines, sociology or sustainability, to come together and sort of forge this new area for something around how do you deal with the post-pandemic times? Because we have levels of need and levels of injury and hurt and healing needed that has really been unprecedented since the end of World War II, basically. And so we really may not, as someone said earlier, maybe we're using too many of the old lexicon for dealing with this. We need something that perhaps is in the area of transdisciplinarity versus just interdisciplinarity. Just food for thought. But would love to hear from others. Anyone want to jump right in? Anna, I saw a hand.
Well, first of all, this is a brilliant conversation. I'm really absolutely buzzing with what we're talking about here in this workshop. And I just think it's so dynamic and energizing. And whilst this might sound like a plug for our book, Rhonda, it's not meant to be, because I wanted to just share with everyone here our experience of working with yourselves at Rutledge around producing a book, which emerged as a result of a conversation between a couple of people at the Dundee conference. And kind of 2 and a bit years later, IACD is producing a book with Rutledge, which will be out in the November time, hopefully, of the year. But the wonderful thing about that book, which is International Community Development Practice, is not that it's written by a pile of people who are familiar with writing and publishing and all the rest of it. And just to illustrate that point, I'm one of the co-editors, and this is my first book. So I'm in at the deep end, along with others, but it has been a wonderful journey for us. And we have worked collaboratively with somewhere in the region of about 80 people from all around the world to produce the book, because we have something like 11 chapters, and each of those chapters has got 2 authors, and then each chapter also has 5 case studies, and some of those case studies have been written by 2 or 3 people. So it's just like an entire family of community development practitioners who have contributed to writing this book. And they are people from all kinds of backgrounds involved in all kinds of work. So, you know, the plug is, if you're sitting there and you think, well, this all sounds great, but I have no experience of that, that is absolutely not a reason not to begin that journey, because that's what we've done, and it has been wonderful, and it's really exciting. And Rutledge, and I'm sure others, you know, that you've referred to as well, are just absolutely dying to work with people in the field who are involved in the work. So absolutely spot on. Great conversation, really challenging ideas. They're all, you know, worthy of PhD studies in their own right, every single sentence that's been referenced. But I just think this is so exciting, and a real re-emergence of community development thinking and ideas and innovation. Roll on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Anna and her colleagues have produced an absolutely stunning book, and it will be launched a little bit later, late summer, early fall. I believe we're looking at the publication date for that. So keep your eyes out for that. So it's just a great book. And I do just want to reiterate what Anna says is we need more people in practice to write and capture these ideas and capture these stories and capture these experiences and insights. And that's so critically important for us all moving forward. So I really think it's good to take that opportunity. And in fact, one of the things that we were talking about is perhaps putting together a book volume in one of the series based on manuscripts from the conference. And ideally, you know, it could be hopefully around some themes, maybe some themes we've talked about. So if you're interested, feel free to reach out. We'll announce that at some point after the conference has concluded. But I think it's, you know, I personally love to get things in writing. I mean, that it's my personal passion for a couple reasons. One is I feel like if we can get and capture these stories and capture what we're doing, we're helping other communities. And we need that because, you know, when I started out long ago in this, there weren't that many stories around to learn from. I mean, you know, the journal Community Development had just started maybe 12 years before or 10 years before I started working. And so there wasn't a to look at, you know, and to learn from. And I just feel like the more we can put out there of what we're learning and sharing, the better everyone's going to be from that. And especially those with diverse voices, from differences across differences in different cultures and different ways of approaching, it helps everyone learn. And I do agree that, you know, as we were talking about earlier, maybe it's time to move beyond some of the tired old rhetoric that we've always used and try to put this out in a way that resonates with even more people. And I do want to call your attention to the chat room. There's some wonderful questions there and conversations and ideas. So people are putting other journals in there too that are open for our kinds of conversations we've just had. So be sure to try to get those noted before we close out that chat. We've got just 5 minutes left. So what I would like to do, if it's okay, Anna, and you're our guide, so you tell us if that's okay, we will just each of us take 1 minute and sort of close out. Is that okay? And if you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us by email. I put mine in there earlier. I'm not sure how to get it to you otherwise, other than to put it in the chat. But, you know, I just want to say what a delight this has been to hear your perspectives and to share some ideas and hopefully inspire others to write and publish so we can share these ideas. I mean, this is so critically important. But more than that, to keep having those conversations, because that's how it moves us forward. So let's see, Uchendu, you want to say your sort of closing statement, then we'll go to Bjorn and then Craig?
Thank you, Rhonda, and thank you all. It's been a pleasure being here. Actually, it's been quite a rewarding and learning experience for me. And maybe in just one sentence, all I would like to mention is that the pandemic has created a new form of community, but also created a new form of anti-community. And this anti-community is also embedded within community. And our ability when it comes to local development, to the ability to actually through policies understand how to deal with human behavior, which is a critical aspect of community, would be the basis on which we can actually create the necessary resilience that we need in order to move in the post-pandemic period. But also it's important that we are much more open-minded, actually, more open-minded and receptive to the situation of the times in order to be much more innovative with the approaches that we have to use to deal with it. Thanks very much.
Well put. I'll just add that so much of my training in community development as an academic was about trying to, set my heart aside, right? Where I was really encouraged that you're a social scientist, or you're an academic, which is fine, but I didn't get into community work for any of those reasons. I got into community work because of my heart. And what the pandemic has reminded me is that it's that heart work that actually is so very important to our communities, and that I think has to go hand in hand with any other kind of well-being we want to think about, or any other kind of indicators. And so I'll say that my fear as an academic is that I'm crazy and nobody else wants to hear that kind of stuff. And so, to have this space to express those parts of it is important to me. And I would encourage you, if you feel similarly, I hope you'll put that into your work. I hope we'll see more writing that speaks that way, because sometimes I think we overthink why other people don't read our work. Sometimes it feels dehumanized, just as we're trying to fight dehumanization. So I hope you'll do that, and I take encouragement from the conversation, and I hope you will too.
I will add that there are a new generation of individuals who are finally moving into places that have more influence in the publishing world. So I'm a pretty young scholar to be an editor-in-chief of a journal. And so those who I'm working with, from Rhonda and others, I would say are taking, for lack of a better term, a more progressive approach to welcoming different approaches and sort of thinking out of the box. And editors are people, right? We're not, so we're here to get things published and get things out there that people are going to read. But also, it's not just on you to write something they're going to read. It's our job too to help get your work showcased. I remember at a job interview that I did not get the job, and I did a terrible job interviewing at, but there was a wonderful woman at the University of Kentucky named Lori Garkovich, and she had a Post-it, which I will paraphrase, in her office. It said, "There's no such thing as an unpublished manuscript, just a writer who gave up." And I think about that often as I work with different authors in different parts of their journey, because that was very influential, just reading that on a little filing cabinet in a small office at the University of Kentucky. So again, here to mentor and help whatever you need.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. And Bjorn, you're not crazy. It's heart-centered work. I mean, I think those in community development who are called to it, that's exactly why. we keep doing it. It's more than just, you know, the quantitative aspects or all of that. It's something bigger, and we become bigger than ourselves when we work in this space. I mean, I really believe that, and encourage each of you to do well and stay in touch. And who knows, maybe we can form a study group around caring community development or something, whatever we decide to name it as part of IACD or something, who knows. But anyway, thank you, and hope to see some of you in the networking session. Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks very much, folks. And yeah, the networking session is starting now.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Anna and Anna.